My wife and her family locked me out during the freezing blizzard. I disappeared without warning, and 3 days later, my phone exploded with pleading messages. I never thought my life would fall apart because of a decision made to help family. I've been married to Elena for 8 years. We have 2 children, Daniel, 8, and Sophia, 6. Until recently, we were what I would consider a normal family. I work as a systems engineer for a software development company. I don't earn a fortune, but it allowed us to live comfortably in our 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Everything changed when Elena's parents lost their house due to financial problems. Elena explained the situation to me with tears in her eyes. It will only be for a few months until they find their own place. What could I say? They are family, and in difficult times, family supports each other. How naive I was. The first few weeks were uncomfortable but manageable. Her mother, Marta, insisted on reorganizing everything every day, which seemed like a kind gesture until she began criticizing how I organized everything without consulting me. Her father, Roberto, a man who retired early due to back problems that miraculously disappeared when he wanted to go fishing, spent the whole day watching television at a deafening volume. "It's their house too," Elena would repeat every time I tried to set some boundaries. Soon, that phrase became the soundtrack to my deterioration. A month later, Elena's brother, Javier, arrived. Just for a few weeks, while he finds a job, was the explanation. A 32-year-old guy without a stable job who spent more time criticizing my lack of ambition than looking for work. He settled into my study, the only space I considered truly mine. My books ended up in boxes in the garage to make room for his video game console. 3 months in, the family dynamic was unrecognizable. I was no longer consulted for any decision in my own house. The walls, formerly a light blue that Elena and I had chosen, were now painted a beige that Martha considered more elegant. My favorite armchair disappeared because it took up too much space and was replaced by a rocking chair that Roberto brought from his old house. To avoid conflict, I began accepting overtime at work. I volunteered for projects that no one wanted, just to delay my return home. Sometimes I worked so late that when I arrived, everyone was already having dinner without me. "You could have let us know you were coming for dinner," Elena told me one night, as if I were an unexpected guest at my own table. Family conversations began to systematically exclude me. They talked about anecdotes they shared during the day, inside jokes, and plans they had made without consulting me. When I tried to join in, Javier would roll his eyes or Marta would subtly change the subject. "He's always been too sensitive," Elena would tell me when I expressed my discomfort in the privacy of our bedroom. "In my family, we tell it like it is, without so much drama." One Friday night, I arrived home and found they had completely reorganized the garage, throwing away personal projects I had been working on for months. When I asked what had happened to my things, Roberto replied, "It was just junk collecting dust." "He's always been too sensitive," Elena would tell me when I expressed my discomfort in the privacy of our bedroom. "In my family, we tell it like it is, without so much drama." One Friday night, I arrived home and found they had completely reorganized the garage, throwing away personal projects I had been working on for months. When I asked what had happened to my things, Roberto replied, "It was just junk collecting dust." "But I was building a dollhouse for Sophia," I said, looking for the pieces I had carefully cut and sanded. "I already bought her a plastic one. Better than that thing you were making," Roberto replied without even looking at me. I looked at Elena, expecting some kind of support. She just shrugged. "The truth is, it took up a lot of space and Dad needed room for his fishing gear." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, feeling that every corner of my life was being invaded and altered without my consent. Elena slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to the turmoil inside me. The situation reached its critical point exactly 1 week ago. It was the day of the worst blizzard in years. I had agreed to stay late at the office to finish an urgent project. I drove carefully through the snow-covered streets, thinking how much I just wanted a hot shower and my bed. When I got home, close to 10 p.m., my key didn't work in the lock. I tried several times, thinking that maybe the cold had affected the mechanism. I rang the doorbell. No one answered. I knocked on the door harder. Finally, I saw the living room window curtain move. There they all were, Elena, her parents, and Javier, looking at me through the glass. I could see the warmth of the home, the Christmas lights they had put up without consulting me, and their faces illuminated by a strange mixture of amusement and contempt. "Open the door. It's freezing out here," I yelled as the snow piled up on my shoulders. Roberto approached the window and said clearly, "Let the freeloader fend for himself." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Freeloader? I paid the mortgage, the bills, the food they all consumed. "Elena, please open the door," I pleaded, focusing on my wife, hoping for a glimmer of compassion. She exchanged a look with her brother, who said loud enough for me to hear, "Freeze. See if you learn who's boss." What broke my heart were not his words, but what came next. Elena high-fived Javier and laughed. She laughed while I shivered in the snow, as if my suffering were the funniest joke in the world. At that moment, something broke inside me. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I didn't plead anymore. I simply turned around, walked to my car, and left. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was Roberto closing the curtain, like someone closing an insignificant chapter of his life. They didn't know it then, but I was closing a chapter too, and they wouldn't be in the next one. Many ask me why I didn't call the police at that time. Honestly, I wasn't thinking clearly. The humiliation, the cold, and the betrayal clouded my judgment. Besides, what would I tell them? That my family locked me out of my own house? It sounds pathetic, even now as I write it. But what happened next justified my decision to simply leave. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour with the car heaters on full blast while trying to process what had just happened. Tears froze on my cheeks. It wasn't just the physical cold. It was a coldness that came from within, from the realization that my own wife had chosen to humiliate me rather than protect me. Finally, I stopped at a roadside motel, one of those places with flickering neon signs and rooms that smell of cheap disinfectant. $35 a night. I paid for 3 nights in advance. The room was small but clean, a single bed, an old TV, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned off my cell phone. That simple act, completely disconnecting from the outside world, gave me an immediate sense of relief, as if I had been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Sometimes silence is the only worthy response you can give. I took off my wet clothes and took a hot shower. As the water ran over my body, I realized that I couldn't remember the last time I had showered without the pressure of someone banging on the door or complaining that I was taking too long. This small motel room, with its dated decor and worn bedspread, felt more like home than my own house had in recent months. That night, I slept for 10 hours straight, something I hadn't done since Elena's parents moved in with us. I woke up disoriented, not knowing where I was for a moment. Then I remembered, and strangely, instead of feeling anguish, I felt peace. I ordered breakfast at the cafe next to the motel: eggs, bacon, coffee. I slowly savored each bite without the usual soundtrack of criticism about my table manners or my strange eating habits, as Marta called them. During those 3 days, I did something I hadn't done in a long time: think clearly. I mentally reviewed the last 8 months of my life like someone examining an infected wound they've been ignoring. How had I allowed things to get to this point? At what point did I become a stranger in my own life? On the second day, I bought a notebook and began to document everything: dates, incidents, conversations. Patterns I hadn't recognized before began to emerge. It wasn't just that my in-laws were pushing me out. It was that Elena was actively opening the door for them to do so. I also checked my laptop, the only thing I had with me besides the clothes I was wearing. I accessed my bank accounts, and what I found left me cold: small weekly withdrawals, between 50 and 100 pesos, that I didn't remember making. They coincided with the days Elena and Marta went shopping. I assumed they were buying food and household items, but the charges came from clothing stores and beauty salons. It wasn't just that they were stealing my money, they were stealing my dignity, little by little. I investigated deeper. In the last 6 months, there had been withdrawals of more than 3,000 pesos that I couldn't explain. Meanwhile, I remembered all the times Javier or Roberto complained that I wasn't contributing enough or that I was a freeloader. In my inbox, I found accumulated emails that I hadn't checked. Among them, a notification from the bank about an attempt to change my access password. Someone had tried to access my main account using my email address, but they failed because I had two-factor authentication. On the morning of the third day, while I was having coffee at the motel cafe, I received an email from an unknown sender. It was Marcos, our neighbor from across the street. We'd never been close. We barely greeted each other when we crossed paths. I saw what happened the night of the blizzard, he wrote. It's not the first time they've locked you out. I have recordings from my security camera of 2 other occasions in the last month. If you need the recordings for any legal proceedings, let me know. He attached a video clip. There I was, 3 weeks earlier, knocking on the door for almost 20 minutes while the living room light was still on. Eventually, Javier opened it, and I could see his mocking smile even from the camera angle. It wasn't an elaborate conspiracy against me, it was something more painful, a pattern of abuse that had become so normalized that even my neighbors could see it clearly, while I justified it. I remembered other coincidences, like how my car key regularly disappeared on weekends when I needed to go out, how my important documents mysteriously appeared disarranged, how the Wii password changed without my being notified. At 3 p.m. on the third day, I finally turned on my cell phone. The avalanche was immediate. 47 text messages, 28 missed calls, 13 voicemails. Elena's first messages were furious. Where the hell are you? How dare you leave like this? You're being childish and dramatic. Then they changed to worried. Please answer. We're worried. The kids are asking about you. Just tell me you're okay. Finally, pleading. Please come back. We'll talk about this. I promise things will change. I love you. We need you. Javier's messages were more direct. Coward. You abandoned your family. I always knew you didn't have what it takes. Followed by, come on, man, it was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive. Roberto had sent a single message. If you come back, we'll talk like men about what happened. But the message that really broke me was the audio from Daniel, my son. Dad, why does Grandma say you don't love us? I know you do. Sophia is crying a lot. Please come back soon. I promise to behave better if it's because I misbehaved. My 8-year-old son had grasped something I had refused to see. They were manipulating even the perception my children had of me, making me responsible for a situation they had created. Among this avalanche of messages, I found one from our bank, a security alert for unusual activity. Someone had attempted to make a large transfer from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. The transfer had been automatically blocked because it exceeded our daily limit. I called the bank immediately. The recipient account was in the name of Roberto Garcia, my father-in-law. The amount, 15,000 pesos, almost all of our savings for the children's college education. At that moment, everything became clear. It wasn't just about emotional abuse or psychological manipulation. They were planning to systematically rob me. I sat on the motel bed with my phone in one hand and the evidence in the other. For the first time in a long time, I saw clearly what I had to do. I replied to a single message from Elena. We'll meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Central Cafe. Just you and me. We need to talk. She replied almost immediately. Thank God. Of course. I love you. Those 3 words, which would have comforted me before, now sounded hollow. Because love doesn't leave someone freezing in the snow while you high-five your brother. That night, I called a lawyer whose card I had kept after he helped us buy the house. I explained my situation, and we agreed to meet early the next morning. For the first time since I left home, I cried. Not for myself, but for my children, for the family I thought I had, and that I now clearly saw had been an illusion. But the tears I shed that night weren't of weakness, but of determination. Some comment that I should have seen the signs earlier. They're right. The signs were there. The progressive isolation, the derogatory comments, the appropriation of spaces. But when you're in a situation of abuse, everything gradually becomes normalized, like the frog in the water that slowly heats up until it boils. By the time you realize it, it's too late. However, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. I woke up at 5 a.m., too anxious to continue sleeping. I showered and dressed in the same clothes I had been wearing for the past few days, washed in the small motel sink. It wasn't ideal for an important confrontation, but it had a strange symbolic power. These were the clothes they had let me freeze in. At 8 a.m., I met with Carlos, my lawyer, at his office. We reviewed the evidence I had collected, the bank statements, the emails, the neighbor's video, the screenshots of the messages. With each piece I added to the puzzle, his expression became more serious. "You have a solid case for divorce on grounds of psychological abuse," he told me, "and possibly for a restraining order against your father-in-law and brother-in-law. The evidence of embezzlement could even lead to criminal charges, if you want to go that route." I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far, but knowing I had options gave me a sense of control I hadn't experienced in a long time. "For now, let's focus on protecting your assets and ensuring you have access to your children," Carlos continued. "I've prepared a joint custody petition that we can file immediately." I left his office with a folder full of documents and a clear plan. For the first time in months, I felt armed, not with anger or resentment, but with the truth and the law on my side. At 10 a.m. sharp, I entered the Central Cafe. Elena was already there, sitting at a table in the back. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back carelessly. Seeing me, she jumped up and tried to hug me. I stepped back, keeping my distance. "Thank God you're okay," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "We were so worried. The kids miss you terribly." "Sit down, please," I replied, keeping my voice low and controlled. We sat facing each other. I ordered a black coffee. She didn't order anything. "Where have you been? Why did you disappear like that?" she asked with a mixture of concern and reproach. "I think you know exactly why I left," I replied. "You left me out of my own house during a blizzard. You laughed while your brother told me to freeze." She looked away. "It was just a joke that got out of control. Javier was being Javier. You know how he is. We didn't think you'd take it so seriously as to disappear for days." "A joke," I repeated slowly. "Was it also a joke when they changed the lock without giving me a new key? Or when they tried to transfer 15,000 pesos from our joint account to your father's account?" Her face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." At that moment, the cafe door opened and Carlos walked in, punctual as we had agreed. He sat next to me and placed his briefcase on the table. "Who is he?" Elena asked, her voice rising several octaves. My lawyer," I replied simply. "Elena, you're lying to me, and we both know it. I have proof of everything. The unauthorized withdrawals, the attempts to access my accounts, the pattern of psychological abuse, even recordings of the times they've locked me out of the house." Carlos opened his briefcase and began placing documents on the table: bank statements, screenshots, the neighbor's written testimony. Sometimes the truth hurts more than any lie we've been told. I watched as Elena's face went from pale to deep red. Her hands trembled as she tried to read the documents in front of her. This isn't what it seems," she stammered. "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied calmly. "I filed for divorce this morning. Carlos will officially serve you the papers, but I wanted to tell you personally." "Divorce?" she exclaimed, too loudly. Several people in the cafe turned to look. "You can't be serious." "What about the kids? What about our family?" "It's precisely because of the children that I'm doing this," I said. "I will not allow them to grow up in an environment where abuse and manipulation are normalized. I've requested joint custody. You can accept it voluntarily, or we can leave it in the hands of the judge, who will see all this evidence." Elena burst into tears, but I noticed something strange about her crying. It seemed rehearsed, as if she had anticipated that tears would be her best defense. "What you did to me that night wasn't just cruel, Elena. It was a statement. You were telling me that I don't matter, that I'm dispensable. And you agreed with them." She wiped her tears furiously. "And this is your revenge? Destroying our family because of one night of bad judgment." Carlos intervened for the first time. "Ma'am, this goes beyond an isolated incident. We have documented months of systematic abuse and evidence of fraudulent financial activity that could constitute a crime." Elena looked at me, her expression changing from sadness to anger. "You were always weak. A real man would have put my family in their place from the beginning, instead of running away like a coward." There it was. The mask had finally fallen. This was the real Elena, the one who had been hiding behind years of subtle manipulation. "Thank you for confirming that I made the right decision," I said, getting up. "Carlos will be in touch with you for the next steps. I want to see my children this afternoon. I'll be at Roosevelt Park at 4 p.m. If they're not there, the judge will know you're obstructing my right to see them." I left the cafe without looking back, but I could feel her gaze on my back. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. As expected, Elena's family united against me. Roberto threatened to destroy me if I went ahead with the divorce. Marta called all our mutual friends, telling them that I had abandoned my family for no reason. Javier even showed up at my work, causing a scene until security escorted him out. But I had something they didn't: the documented truth. The judge reviewed the evidence and granted a temporary restraining order against Roberto and Javier. He also froze our joint accounts to prevent further unauthorized transfers and granted me the right to collect my personal belongings from the house, accompanied by an officer. When I entered what was once my home, I barely recognized it. In just a week, it had been completely transformed. My photographs had disappeared from the walls. My books, the few that remained outside the boxes, were carelessly piled in a corner of the garage. It was as if they had tried to erase any evidence of my existence. My children ran to me as soon as they saw me. I hugged them tightly, trying to hold back the tears. "I knew you'd come back, Dad," Daniel whispered in my ear. "I told them you hadn't left forever." I took the essentials: clothes, important documents, some sentimental objects that I had hidden, foreseeing that something like this might happen someday. While packing, I found my wedding album hidden under the bed. I glanced through it briefly, observing the smiles, the apparent happiness, wondering at what point everything had begun to fall apart. "Are we moving, Dad?" Sophia asked, following me around the room. "No, honey. Dad is going to live somewhere else for a while, but I will come to see you very often, and sometimes you and Daniel will come stay with me." "Can we go with you now?" Daniel asked, his eyes full of hope. My heart broke a little more. "Not yet, champ. There are grown-up things we have to sort out first. But soon, I promise." In the following months, I rented a small apartment near the children's school. It wasn't anything luxurious: 2 bedrooms, a modest living room, a functional kitchen. But it was mine. Every corner reflected my decisions, my tastes, my essence. The divorce process progressed faster than expected. Elena, seeing that the evidence was conclusive, opted for an out-of-court settlement. We divided assets, established joint custody, and agreed to sell the house, splitting the proceeds equitably. Her parents and Javier disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived, moving to another city when it became evident they could face charges for financial fraud if I chose to press them. The first night the kids stayed at my new apartment was magical. We made homemade pizza together, something we hadn't done in months because Marta insisted that we made too much mess in the kitchen. We read bedtime stories without interruptions or comments about how I was spoiling them with too much attention. As the months passed, we established new routines. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and alternating weekends, the children stayed with me. I gradually noticed changes in them. Sophia started laughing again with that carefree childhood laughter I hadn't heard in a long time. Daniel began to share more, to open up about how he had felt during the dark months. Grandma always said bad things about you when you weren't around, he confessed to me one night while I was tucking him in. She said you didn't love us enough, but I knew it wasn't true. I stroked his hair. Some people say things that aren't true when they're angry or scared. But I want you to know something. Never, not for a second, have I stopped loving you and your sister. You are the most important thing in my life. 6 months after the blizzard incident, Daniel and I were sitting on the small balcony of my apartment. It was a mild night. The stars shone brightly. We were sharing a quiet moment after finishing his science project. Dad, he said suddenly, I like being here with you. Here I can breathe. I felt a lump in my throat. They were exactly the same words that had gone through my mind that first night at the motel. Here I could breathe. Without constant criticism, without walking on eggshells, without feeling like a stranger in my own space. I can breathe too when you're here, champ, I replied, hugging him. It hasn't been an easy road. There are difficult days, moments of doubt, nights of loneliness. Elena and I maintain a cordial but distant relationship, focused solely on the well-being of the children. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had confronted her family earlier, if I had set clear boundaries from the beginning. But I've learned not to torture myself with what-ifs. The important thing is that I found the strength to break the cycle of abuse before it was too late, before my children grew up believing that kind of dynamic was normal or acceptable. The house we shared was sold a month ago. With my share, I've made the down payment on a modest but cozy house with a garden where the children can play and a small workshop where I'm finishing building that dollhouse for Sophia that Roberto threw away. Sometimes you have to let your world crumble so you can build a better one on the ruins. I don't hold a grudge against Elena or her family. Anger would only have kept me chained to them. Instead, I chose freedom. The freedom to breathe, to be myself, to teach my children that respect and true love don't come with conditions or manipulations. That night in the snow was the end of something, but it was also the beginning. The beginning of my real life.